Very good morning to everyone. Thank you to the office bearers of the SCT and the ENAD group for this very timely gathering. And we all heard what former Vice President Venkaiah Garuji had to say about the importance of building a thorough scientific temper into our young people, and that has to come both from educational institutions. Of course, the family is also very important, that what you are exposed to, as well as the media. And so it's very good that science communication has been taken up as a topic today, because science communication is something that actually is very, very critical in today's world. When data and knowledge is exploding very, very rapidly, it is sometimes very hard to keep up with everything that's available, particularly since we live in a world where we rely a lot on the internet, on being connected with other people through channels like WhatsApp, but also social media to get a lot of our information. And so it becomes extremely important to pay attention to what is out there. So rather than the traditional channels of communication, people now rely a lot on digital means. And so what is available out there is a mix of good and bad. Not everything that we read online is actually correct. So I think this topic or question that we are here today to address, that how do we take science from the lab to society and do it in ways that actually improve people's lives. So science is not something which needs to be done in abstract or needs to be done in scientist labs or in classrooms. Many people think of science in that way, that you have to put on a white coat and be inside a lab to do science. But ultimately that science has to translate into improving the lives of people, whether it is through health, whether it is through space technology, whether it is through a new drug or a vaccine, or even things like the internet, or like when electricity was invented. Everything we take for granted today came from scientific discoveries that were made and then built upon. The other point about science is that it's constantly evolving and changing, right? And so it is a fact that science is not static, and that our knowledge and facts need to keep up and need to change with a deeper understanding. And today that is also happening at a very fast rate. This also needs to be communicated to people, because if you say something today and you want to say something a little bit different tomorrow based on the new knowledge, people should not get the impression that either you were not knowing what you were talking about or you were not speaking the truth. So we actually live in a world today where science has never been stronger, and yet public trust in science is becoming fragile. During COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how rapidly there were advances in the development of vaccines and other countermeasures, and yet we also saw fear and anger and distrust. So this experience taught us that along with fighting the virus, we also needed to fight the infodemic. So that word was used a lot during COVID, infodemic, which is an epidemic of false and misleading information. And today, in fact, again, you see that happening, especially around vaccines and other health-related information in the United States, where there is a very strong group of people who are, including the Secretary of Health himself, who is an anti-vaxxer, an anti-science person, and who's promoting a lot of false beliefs. This has led to actual impact on people's lives. So it's not just something which is nice to have, but if you develop a distrust in science, a distrust in vaccines, it has led to an increase in measles. They've had more measles in the United States this year, 2025, than they had over the last 30 or 40 years. And that's because more people are now staying away from vaccines. One thing we need to understand, that facts alone are not enough. So one of the important lessons from the pandemic was that information is not the same as communication. We at that time assumed, many of us, that just provide people with facts and graphs and numbers and figures and that would automatically translate into rational decisions. But human beings, they don't live inside spreadsheets. They actually operate and make decisions based on trust. Who do you trust? Who does the information come from? Your own identity, your lived experiences, fears and hopes, and who are the voices you find credible in your own community. It became very clear even during COVID, certain voices were more credible than others. So the point is that sometimes your facts may be correct, but the failure is that we speak without listening first. So at the WHO, we did have a program that our communications department developed, which was called social listening. So the social listening was essentially about keeping a very close watch, particularly on social media and online conversations, about what were the themes that people were discussing, what were they worried about, what were they anxious about, where was the misinformation actually really being, in which areas was there more misinformation, and which areas were there more questions. And I also learned that when people ask questions, it doesn't mean that they are a skeptic or anti-science. It only means that they may not understand what we are saying. They are genuinely asking a doubt or a question. And we should, as scientists, we should pay attention to that. We should respect those views and we should, of course, communicate in a way in which we can address their fears. So, for example, there was a lot of fear about vaccines causing infertility. There were, of course, a lot of conspiracy theories also, that vaccines have all kinds of things like chips that are being injected into people. Those were very far out conspiracy theories. But the fact, does particular vaccine have a particular side effect? That is a genuine question that needs to be answered with data. And when data is being collected, one also needs to say that as of today, we have data, let us say, based on 3 months of experience of using this vaccine. And we know that this and this is happening. In another 6 months, we may have much more data and we may be able to then give a better explanation for certain things. So that uncertainty also has to be communicated along with what are already the facts. So I think as India builds its science communication framework for Viksit Bharat at 2047, we should make 3 shifts. One is that from broadcasting alone, we need to move to listening, which means that we need platforms, we need science hubs and platforms which bring public together with scientists and policymakers to actually understand what do people believe and why. And unless you understand those, because it's very difficult to change mindset unless you understand what are the beliefs behind that. And then from who's going to be the communicators of messages. Let's say for important public health messaging, I think of course the public health experts, the doctors, the scientists, the government officials should speak. But in addition to that, we need to involve our teachers, our frontline workers, our community leaders, faith leaders, youth groups, because when someone of those people speak, you know them, you individually, you have trust in them, and that really helps you to understand the message. From data alone to stories, I always find that a story stays with you much longer than a piece where you only read a lot of statistics. Whereas if you describe something happening as a story, then that message actually tends to stay. And this is true for all of us, I think. So I remember a friend of mine, Dr. Mohan Agashe, who's a very well-known psychiatrist, but he's also an actor, filmmaker, director, and he was director of the Film Institute of India at one point of time. He uses the word smuggling ideas into people's minds. Of course, he is a psychiatrist and he's made many wonderful films, and of late his films are about mental health issues, things that we don't often understand and which are stigmatized in society. We stigmatize people with severe mental illnesses because we don't understand it. And even today, even though there is a much better understanding, even today you'll find a lot of people with mental illness they don't feel that they can speak about it or their families cannot talk about it. So he used to say that you need to, through his films, he was trying to convey that empathy, the understanding, which can only come through a story and not through just telling you that we have X million people suffering from depression or X million people suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia. You don't really get the feeling of what it is. But when you have visualized somebody who has lived with that condition, you have seen it, of course, in our own families, we do experience it. But so the point is that this is where the science communicators and the media comes in a big way, because the media is the bridge, and journalists need to translate scientific stories, scientific discoveries and facts into or bridge it to the public by adding the stories, adding the context, the local context, and of course in the local language. Language is also very important. So I just want to give you one or two other examples. Venkaiah Naidu ji spoke about food security and my father's role in that. Now today, it's true that we have enough food, and in fact we even export food, but we cannot say that everyone in India has adequate nutrition. So what is called hidden hunger, which is a deficiency of micronutrients of iron, zinc, selenium, vitamins, and also quality protein. This actually affects our cognitive development. If you see, our brain develops in the first 5 years of life. After that, the brain is hardly growing. So whatever cognitive development and intellectual development potential has to develop, it is only in the first 5 years. So if you look at 2047, Bharat at 2047, the children who are born today are going to be 21 years old at that time, right? So if we want to really have a demographic dividend from our young people, we have to focus on human capital development, which is essentially health, nutrition, and education. And the first 5 years of life is important. When we see the levels of stunting and underweight today in our country, and at the same time a growing level of obesity, overweight, diabetes, etc., it all boils down to our diet, unhealthy diet. So two important risk factors for health today are diet and air pollution. And these two contribute a huge amount actually of amongst all the risk factors to our health. So we need to address, when we talk about health and well-being, we have to talk about what are the factors that let us live a healthy life and have well-being. And clean air, clean water, good food, nutritious food, sanitation. So good food or nutritious food does not mean expensive food. And the problem is again that here it's a battle with the big companies which promote, which advertise unhealthy food. They misleadingly advertise it as a healthy food. So for a poor person who's running short of time, who's busy working, the woman doesn't have time really to go out and cook. She sees an advertisement which says, buy this product, it will make your children very strong, it will build their muscles. She's going to spend all her money on buying that product rather than on buying some fruits and vegetables and dal which she could cook, and feed her family. So here regulation needs to play a role as well as awareness. And today I think our levels of nutrition awareness are extremely low. Even very well educated people are not aware of what, and Dr. Shashikiran is here. I hope he'll be talking about that later. And also there is a nice booklet that has been released today on oils and fats. And so many misconceptions and myths about nutrition. Everybody wants a quick solution. So the best thing is to take a supplement, take a pill, take a drink, protein drink, rather than go back to healthy eating habits. So there are multiple stakeholders in our food systems. One are the farmers. Our farmers, if we want them to diversify our crops, we need to speak to them in a language which makes sense to them. So why should they diversify? Why should a farmer who grows only paddy diversify? He will do it, he or she will do it if their income is protected. If you ask them to take a hit on their income, they're not going to. After all, that's their survival, particularly since we know in India, more than 60% are small farmers or 80% are small farmers. So Crop diversification is important for our nutrition, but for farmers, their income and livelihoods have to be protected. But also, we can talk to them about climate resilience, and in the future, when we have climate change impacting, you can actually lose a cash crop and the farmer can lose everything in that one disaster, climate disaster. The entire crop can go. This has happened last year. We have seen it happening across India in many states. But if they're diversified and they also have some climate resilient crops like millets, then even if there is a prolonged drought, at least they will have those millets available for them to eat. So they're not going to go hungry. For schools and for school children, we need to link nutrition with learning outcomes and future opportunities. So we've got to give this message about good physical, mental, cognitive growth, which is linked to nutrition, because every child wants to do well. Every child has some role models and heroes, whether they are sports role models or whether they are scientists role models. So we need to link the communication, and we need nutrition gardens, kitchen gardens in every school and Anganwadi center, so that children can not only grow, help to grow, and also to eat and understand what nutritious diet looks like. And for policymakers, we need to make the case that nutrition is not just something which is a health issue. Just like air pollution, it's considered an environmental issue, something that looks bad, but actually it is a health issue. And it is actually cutting years from our lives, significant, and causing all kinds of diseases. So, but for policymakers, we also need to make the economic case, because policy is based not just on scientific facts and evidence, though as scientists we all want to believe that if we provide the facts, the policymaker should act. But that is not how policy is made. It depends on political priorities, it depends on the budget and finances that are available, it depends on administrative feasibility. So scientists also need to communicate in ways that policymakers can understand. It is even if we write a paper which is published in a peer-reviewed journal, if it has an implication for policy, we should be able to very simply make a 1 or 2 page policy note, which actually lays out the problem, what the research had done, what it showed, and how that could actually become a policy and impact much larger numbers of people. So I think that is the true test of strong research, but also the research and academic people who are involved, the experts, and how well that community is able to link to the policymakers and vice versa. So we need that conversation where policymakers also can explain to scientists what their problems are, what are the gaps, which are the areas where they need more data. Data is very, very important for policy making. In fact, former Vice President Venkaiah ji has left, but I remember in 2016 when I was DG ICMR, we released the state-level disease burden estimates for India for the first time. Before that, we did not have a state-level burden. It was all national-level statistics. So when we did that, there was some concern that there will be some comparison, or some states are going to feel bad compared to other states, but actually everybody welcomed that report. Because for a state policy maker, he or she needs to see, okay, in Telangana, what is the burden of disease that I have? What is it that my funding should be going towards, etc., and what should I be planning for in the future? So he and at that time Health Minister Nadda ji were the two who released that, and after that ICMR has been updating the state level disease burdens. So finally I want to talk about science diplomacy. We live in a polarized world. There's increasing geopolitical mistrust. Every day we see all sorts of issues happening. Collaborations are being restricted, narratives are polarized, and sometimes scientific evidence is distorted. I gave you some examples earlier on the vaccines. But science diplomacy rests on simple truths. The first truth is that pathogens do not need passports, as we saw very well during the pandemic. Similarly, climate change does not respect any national boundaries or state boundaries. And third is that human curiosity and compassion, they actually cross political lines. So when it comes to science, when it comes to health, I think diplomacy can actually bridge those barriers and those gaps, which otherwise may be created due to whatever geopolitical reason. So our responsibility again as science communicators becomes to stick to the integrity of evidence. Um, so the ethical line is very clear that we must not distort or suppress science for partisan purposes, because the credibility of science is our greatest public good. So I talked already about science and policy making and bridging that. So I would just like to end by saying that ultimately the goal of scientists is of course to produce excellent science, but only when it has some kind of big public impact or a public good, then actually you feel satisfied. Now every piece of work may not have that, but there are pressing public health challenges, there are pressing issues in society which scientists can solve. I think climate change is also one of them, where we need a lot of innovation, we need a lot of interdisciplinary work to address the challenge which is coming. So the journey from lab to science, it's not a straight road. It is actually a dialogue, it's a partnership between scientists and citizens, and in between, I think, come the science communicators. Experts also need to be humble. So humility is very important. We need to listen. We need to constantly be learning and updating ourselves. And the public needs to have curiosity. Similarly, journalists also need to have curiosity. They need to ask the right questions. People need to ask the right questions. They may not get an answer for everything, but unless you ask the questions, this is never going to be addressed. And so if we listen deeply and we communicate honestly, I think honesty and transparency also very important, and anchor science in compassion and local reality. So there may be a discovery which happens somewhere else, but how is it relevant for us in our local context? Then I think by 2047, India will not only be scientifically advanced, but it will also be scientifically trusted. Thank you very much for this opportunity.